Hey adventurers, so today's going to be another book review. So this is for Brandon Sanderson's secret novel number 2, secret project number 2, and I will not refer to the title until I get into the actual review here. So this is in case you are wanting to avoid spoilers, this is your reminder that now is a good time to click away. Although it's likely that you've already heard the title of this and know a little bit about the setting of this book, even if it's just based on the thumbnail and title that I have put up for this one. Anyways, this is a standalone novel. It's not set in his Cosmere. This is a sci-fi novel, kind of. It's a science fantasy novel as well. It's got the amnesia trope. It's a medieval setting, and it's alternate dimension. That's the type of science fiction that it is. So, with all that said, this is a perfect time to quickly say, if you like what you're seeing from an Erudite adventure, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll get right back into this video. So, secret project number 2, and this is where I'm going to start talking about it, and if you don't want even anything else spoiled for you before you read the book, I'm not going to talk spoilers, it's going to be spoiler free, but things like the title I'm now going to mention. So, the secret project number 2 is titled The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. And the only thing, this is the only one of Brandon Sanderson's secret projects that is not set in the Cosmere. It's a standalone science fiction, alternate dimension novel. But Sanderson just really cannot seem to write a science fiction story. What I mean by that is not that he is physically unable to, it's just that his science fiction novels usually end up becoming fantasy. They usually incorporate enough fantasy elements that they could easily be science fantasy or just straight up fantasy. So that's not really me bashing Sanderson or anything like that. That's just the way that he writes. He's very much a fantasy storyteller, and I like that. But I do like trying to see him write some science fiction, and maybe his Reckoner series is more science fiction than this is, but I haven't read Reckoners yet. Okay, so we'll just get it out of the way right away so I can actually get into talking about the book. But I very, very, very much enjoyed this one, probably more than Secret Project number 1, which is Tress of the Emerald Sea, and probably by quite a bit. I've already seen several people's reactions to this book. I haven't watched very many reviews or anything yet, but I know that Dan from Treebeard's book reviews liked this one a lot, and everybody else seems to be like 3-4 star across ratings regarding this book. I loved it. I'm very much in the camp with Dan that this is 5-star read for me, and I'll talk more about it as I go through, but I just wanted to get that out of the way so that I can actually feel like I can talk about the book. So first off, the title is wonderful, The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. I love unnecessarily long, complicated titles for books, especially when the title does the world building for you. And a great example of this is On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness by Andrew Peterson. It's just so many extra words that are unnecessary, but it sets it tells you what the book is going to be. The title is, this is what all titles should do, is they should tell you exactly what you're going to get into when you read the book. And there's tons and tons of examples, but things like On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, you can guess that it's going to be a fun story with some probably darker themes and things played out, but it's still probably a YA or middle grade book. That's exactly what On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness is. The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England is exactly what that sounds like. I mean, it's not specifically a guide or a handbook in that way, although that is incorporated into it. It is a story about a character trying to survive in medieval England with some comedic elements, and that's what the title reflects, but it also does some world building for you, and I love all of that. And the way that this handbook is tied into the story itself actually works really well. As always, Sanderson writes in a very accessible style, but I feel like he tried a bit harder with this one to make it a bit more prosaic. It's not purple by any means, but there's a little bit more depth, a little bit more intentionality to the prose, a little bit more, and Sanderson is very intentional about his prose, I don't want to say that. like, I don't want to imply that he's not, because he very much is, and his intention behind that is to make it accessible, make it easy for people to read. This one, I feel like he purposely tried to be a bit more purple, if that makes sense. Not, I mean, it's very much still straightforward, plain accessible prose. The amnesia trope is one that I don't tend to love. I haven't seen it done a ton of times, but just the idea of it I don't tend to love, and the few times that I have seen it done, it's not my favorite. I feel like most of the time it gets dragged out too long, and you really don't get enough information about the characters to really want to root for them or get attached to them in any way. Sanderson doesn't have this problem. I enjoyed the unfolding of our main character's story, as well as the relationships being developed throughout the book. I also love how the characters' past relationships affect the current ongoing story. It feels accurate and builds the character believably. You feel like these past interactions, these past relationships that this character has had and that you're discovering as you go through the book, you're feeling like these are not only are they real relationships that somebody like me could have, but you feel that you can understand how they are currently affecting our character still. And that's all good things. The fact that we are seeing these unfolding almost immediately, we're starting to learn more and more about this character. That's good. That's all good stuff. Basically what I'm trying to say here is he doesn't drag the amnesia trope. I mean, it's part of the story, but he doesn't drag it out to the point of frustration for the reader. I also love the world, not just this heavily Anglo-Saxon inspired medieval England. I do love that as well, but also the world that we come from, that our character comes from. It's kind of hard to pin down exactly what year it's supposed to be. It may have mentioned it and I may have missed it, but it seems to be like the not too far future from ourselves, like maybe 30 to 50 years from now, something like that. So the technology is recognizable, but it still feels very science fiction-y. It's pushed beyond what we have currently, and I like seeing that, but I like seeing how familiar it still feels. Oftentimes, the humor that is in Sanderson's books is talked about as not being one of the strongest points of his writing, of Sanderson's writing. It tends to not land with a lot of readers, myself included. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Except in this book, it worked almost every time. But it's not just the humor, it's the various emotional beats throughout the story. It's the way that the characters are constructed and interact with each other, the reality of those relationships. Of course, Sanderson is known for being a great character writer, but for some reason, these characters in some ways feel more real than many of the other characters I've read from Sanderson, and some that we've spent significantly more time with. I love Kaladin, I love Vin, I love these characters that are the main characters of these other greater series, but some of these, there's moments in these characters' lives in this one short book that make you, or in their stories, that make you feel like you know these characters better than you know some of these other characters who have hundreds and hundreds of pages written about them, whereas this one is just it's like a 400-page book, and I feel like I know this character better in some ways, and he feels more real. Some of these characters feel more real in ways than some of those ones that we have spent a lot of time with, and so that's a strength of Sanderson, that he can do that in such a relatively short page count. Overall, this book just worked amazingly well for me. It's definitely my favorite of Sanderson's that I have read recently, and that I've read in a long time. I have said several times and talked about several times how I am a bigger fan of his older works rather than his newer works. His older works meaning basically his first books up until the release of like Oathbringer, and then Oathbringer and this side of Oathbringer I don't tend to love as much. This one, it worked really, really well for me, and I don't know why it connected with me as much as it did. I am very, very much looking forward to having this physical book though, and rereading it physically, because I think that I'll love it even more upon a physical read. Besides the fact that it's full of illustrations that I know are just gonna be gorgeous. Besides that, I think this story is one that I could get more from if I read it physically, which most books I do. Most books I can get more from physically than listening to the audiobook. And especially the Michael Kramer audiobooks. I've mentioned this recently as well, that Michael Kramer is not my favorite narrator. He's good enough in his voices, his character voices are fine, but there's something about his narration that I don't love him as a narrator as much as even his wife, Kate Redding. I like his wife a lot better in most of the stories that she's done that I've listened to of hers. Anyways, now as much as I love this book, I do need to mention mention really this one criticism that I have, and honestly, it is highly likely that this was my mindset while reading it that caused this criticism. But there were several times reading this or listening to this where I was completely spaced out and missed chunks of the story, so that I either had to go back and re-listen to them or just move on and hope that I could pick up the pieces as I went. So there is that to consider while reading it, but at the same time as I feel like I spaced out at points, I also was very sick and very, very tired, and that could have contributed to it. Part of it was falling asleep and just being like, all right, I have no idea what's going on, it's time to stop, or I fell asleep, I guess I should go back and listen to that chunk again, or whatever it is. This could be a criticism. It could be a legitimate criticism, or it could have just been me. I did not, there were times when I spaced out of this book and got lost and had to figure out where to go, how to deal with that, the fact that I had missed some information that was very important. That being said, I was still able to come away from the book having enjoyed the book far more than I had hoped, and definitely than I expected. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be one that is probably not my favorite, and it turns out I loved this book so much. So that's my thoughts on the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson, Secret Project number 2. Very excited to eventually own this physically, because it's going to be gorgeous. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday. Our social media is linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay well.